People are being poisoned in ways you would never guess. In August of this year, Erin Mims was celebrating her birthday with her husband at a Houston restaurant, and after returning to her car, she noticed a napkin on the door handle. When Erin saw the napkin, she thought that her husband was playing a prank on her. She didn't really think much of it, so she grabbed the napkin and threw it out and asked her husband if he had put the napkin on the door handle, and he said no. That's when Erin went back into the restaurant to wash her hands. Shortly after returning to the car, Erin began to feel a tingling sensation on her fingers, and after 5 minutes, her whole arm began to feel numb. Erin says she was having trouble breathing, she got hot flashes, and her heart began to beat really fast. Erin was quickly taken to the hospital, and after doing some tests, they told her that her vitals were all over the place. The doctor told her that it was an acute poisoning from an unknown substance, and the napkin situation may have been an attempted kidnapping. This is what we know about the 4 Idaho students who were murdered in their house. On November 13th at 12 p.m., 4 University of Idaho students were found stabbed to death in their beds in a home that they shared. The victims were 20-year-old Ethan, 21-year-old Kaylee, 21-year-old Madison, and 20-year-old Zaina. Just a few hours before Madison and Kaylee were murdered at 1:40 a.m., they were seen on surveillance grabbing some food from a food truck in downtown Moscow. They then took an Uber home, and at around 3 to 4 a.m., their lives were taken. Ethan and Zaina, who were a couple, also arrived to the home around the same time as Kaylee and Madison. There were also 2 other students in the home while the murder took place, but they were not harmed, and they said they did not hear anything. These students in the home were also not the ones who called 911, but police will not release that information. Police do believe that this was a targeted and isolated attack, but they do not have any suspects at the moment. In my opinion, I think there's a lot more to this story, and I hate to say it, but these attacks seem really random, and this may be a serial killer.
He was standing in the hardware section of a crowded store feeling trapped and desperate to escape. That's when director Toby Hopper's eyes fell upon a chainsaw, and a terrifying idea for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was born. The 1974 film would become one of the most controversial movies ever released. Audiences were horrified, believing that it was a true story, but the truth was more complex. Now, Ed Gein, the inspiration for Leatherface, wasn't a serial killer in the traditional sense. He had killed only 2 people, but was a ghoul who stole females' body parts from graves, using them for curtains, chairs, and even wearing the skin as a dress. That's just crazy. Now, the film's terror was amplified by its realism. Now, during the infamous dinner scene, actress Marilyn Burns actually cut her finger because the fake blood wouldn't flow. And the chainsaw, despite the film's title, only cut through one person, and that was Leatherface himself. Now, what started as a fleeting thought in a hardware store evolved into a cinematic nightmare that continues to send shivers down the spine. Now, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre wasn't just a film. It was a horrifying glimpse into the darkest corners of the human mind. A story that promises terror and delivers in a way that will make you think twice about straying off the beaten path.
This is the story of Boris Weisfeiler, an American professor who was potentially abducted by a murderous cult. In 1984, Boris Weisfeiler went into the Chilean wilderness on a solo backpacking trip. He tells his sister Olga that he'll give her a call on the day he's supposed to be back, but when that day comes, he never calls. Boris never made it back from Chile, but the American police were hesitant to go look for him, because it was rumored that deep in the Chilean wilderness there was a cult being run by disgraced World War II German soldiers. So weeks pass and nothing is being done, but then Olga gets a message that they found Boris's backpack. It was found by a river, and the Chilean government basically uses that to say that Boris drowned, case closed. But it turns out that missing from his backpack was his passport, some cash, and his ticket home. And Olga's like, if he accidentally drowned, why did he take all that stuff with him? So years go by and the investigation's just closed, there's no new information. But one day, Olga gets a letter. And this is a declassified document from the US government saying that Boris was on the property of the Colonia Dignidad when he disappeared. So what the heck does that mean? Well, the Colonia was the Aryan cult that was hiding out in the Chilean wilderness. It was founded by Paul Schaefer, who had to flee Germany after World War II. Though his involvement in the war was bad, he was kicked out of Germany after it came out that he was abusing young boys in his care. So he fled with other Germans to Chile and opened his own prison camp in the wilderness. And when Boris went missing in 1985, the last place he was seen was on the property of the cult. Boris's body was never found, but there is so much more to his story, and you can check it out tonight on the podcast.
This former Disney music executive was charged with child sex abuse. This is John Healy himself, who's now in his 60s, and in 2017 he was charged with 3 felony counts of child sex abuse. All of this had happened apparently a decade ago. He was accused of abusing one girl when she was 15 years old and then targeting another 11-year-old girl and abusing her all the way up until she was 15. When he was arrested back in 2017, John's Twitter profile only read one thing: Disney concerts and living to glorify God in all things. Now, when all this happened back in 2017, I read that Disney terminated him immediately from his position. I mean, how could they not? These were some very graphic and disturbing allegations that were made against John. But if you go to his LinkedIn page and you scroll down a bit, it says that he still works at Disney. I don't know what that means, if it's true or not, but it's kind of strange. In fact, I can't even find anything about how this case was ended. Hold up, now this is interesting. So I just stopped and really dug into the research about this guy, and I found that they dropped the charges in 2019 because there was a hung jury. They couldn't reach a decision on whether or not he was actually guilty of these crimes or not. Apparently, according to this news article that I'm reading, the people involved in the case did not want the charges to be dropped, but his defense team argued that since it was the 3rd trial that he was involved in, the case should be thrown out, and the judge complied and just threw all the charges out. So, I don't know, maybe he is still working for Disney. Maybe it does make sense. I don't really know. But it should be noted that allegedly the girls that he abused were from his own family. They were family members of his, and obviously they were minors. I guess we'll just never know the truth on this story.
Talk about the true story behind Candy on Hulu and Love and Death on HBO Max, and how Betty Gore was axed 41 times. Betty Gore was born on January 9th, 1950, and while she was attending college, she met a teaching assistant named Alan Gore through one of her classes. Two of them immediately hit it off, they began dating, and in 1970, Alan and Betty decided to get married. Soon after their wedding, they had their first daughter named Alyssa, and after this, they decided to move to the small town of Wiley, Texas to start a new life. At first, their marriage seemed to be great. They were very in love with each other, and they were excited to grow their family. However, according to reports, Betty did struggle with anxiety and occasional depression. Alan would often have to travel for work, so this meant that Betty was home alone with Alyssa, and this would just cause her a lot of anxiety. She would constantly be calling his office to check in on him. She would call the hotel he was staying at just to talk to him. The traveling was causing a lot of issues in their relationship, and since they had just moved to a new town, Betty didn't really have a lot of friends. She wanted to be more active in the community, so she decided to join her local church, and that's when she began making friends. She started to become friends with a woman named Candace Montgomery, also known as Candy. Both sang in the choir, and the reason they started to become closer is because Betty's daughter, Alyssa, started to grow closer to Candy's daughter. Now, a little bit about Candy. She was married to a man named Pat Montgomery, and the two of them lived a very comfortable life in Wiley, Texas. Her husband had a very good job, so she was able to stay home and take care of their 2 kids. And she had a very nice house. They actually called her house the party house because that's where everyone would get together to hang out. She was friends with everyone in the community. I mean, she was kind of like your typical PTA mom. Even though Betty had joined the church and had started making new friends, things between her and Alan were still not good. She even confided in her friend Candy and told her that her and Alan did not have sex. She just didn't know what else to do or how to get the sparks going again. However, Betty ended up getting pregnant with a second daughter, and she thought that this would change things between her and Alan. And it somewhat did. He was excited about their second daughter. Candy was excited about this as well. She even threw Betty a baby shower at her own house. Alan even told Betty that they were going to take a trip to Europe, just the two of them without children, so that they could reconnect and just be with each other. So it seemed like things were going well. On Friday, June 13th, 1990, Alan was away on a business trip in Minnesota, and Betty was at home taking care of their newborn daughter and getting everything ready for their trip to Europe. Their oldest daughter, Alyssa, actually spent the night at Candy's house, and she was supposed to come back later that day because she had swim practice. However, Alyssa and Candy's daughter really wanted to have another sleepover, so Candy called Betty and asked her if it was okay if Alyssa spent another night there. Betty told Candy that Alyssa had swim practice, and that's when Candy offered to go to Betty's house, pick up the swimsuit, and take Alyssa to practice. So Betty agreed to this plan. Later that morning, Candy stopped by Betty's house to pick up the bathing suit, and then she left. As the day continued to progress, Alan called the house just to check in on Betty, but he wasn't able to get in contact with her. He called one of the neighbors to go check on Betty, and that's when they discovered that Betty was dead. Okay, more in part 2.
Imagine growing up knowing that you were adopted, and 60 years later, when you take an ancestry DNA test, you find out that your birth mom was the victim of one of the most notorious cold cases in American history. Richard Hanchett was born in 1958 in Michigan, and he was immediately given up for adoption by his birth mother. In 2018, Richard, who still lived in Texas, decided to take an ancestry DNA test, and he was immediately matched with relatives from his birth mother's family. He connected with them and even went down to Tennessee to finally meet them. And that's when Richard learned that his birth mother, Ruth Marie Terry, had been missing since the early 70s. For decades, her family searched for her, but they were unable to find her, until 2022.
In October of this year, the FBI and Massachusetts State Police announced that nearly 50 years later, they had finally identified the victim of the oldest unsolved homicide case in Massachusetts, the Lady of the Dunes. And the Lady of the Dunes was identified as Ruth Marie Terry. On July 26, 1974, a little girl was hiking with her family when she came across the body of a mutilated woman. Her hands were missing. Police believe this was in an attempt to get rid of her fingerprints so they couldn't identify her, and her head was nearly severed. Detectives searched motels and rooming houses and even reviewed thousands of missing persons cases from Massachusetts. They also used clay models to recreate what the Lady of the Dunes might have looked like. Her case unfortunately went cold, and some even speculated that she was the victim of the South Boston gangster Whitey Bulger. In 2000, authorities had her body exhumed to extract DNA, but it wasn't until recently that they were able to use genealogy testing to identify her. This is the same technique that was used to identify the Golden State Killer. Now flash forward to November of this year, authorities announced that they had a new development in the investigation. They had now identified the Lady of the Dunes, now they had to identify who her killer was. Authorities revealed they were seeking information on a man who was already deceased. This man was known as Guy Rockwell Moldavan. Guy was an antique dealer, and he was actually arrested in 1960 in connection to the disappearance of his former wife and her daughter. Remains believed to be theirs were found in their Seattle home. He only served a suspended sentence, so he actually got released in 1962. Now, court records indicate that Guy and Ruth actually got married in Reno, Nevada in February of 1974, just months before she was killed. Now that they have her identity, this case is being treated as a homicide investigation by the Massachusetts State Police and FBI. The public is actually being asked to review Terry's Seeking Information poster. This includes newly released photos and a little bit more information. This case is still ongoing.
This is what happened to 4-year-old Luz Gonzalez and how she was killed while her mom tied her shoes. The family is originally from Mexico, but at the time Luz lived in Brooklyn, New York with her mother Reina, and she was just honestly the cutest little 4-year-old girl. She was just absolutely adorable and just so nice and kind to everyone. On Sunday, June 24th, 2018, Luz and her mother were walking outside of this laundromat called the Clean City Laundromat in New York. They were walking along the sidewalk, but as you can see, this whole parking lot is just a mess. There is no division between the parking lot and the sidewalk, so if someone reverses from the laundromat, they literally have to drive over the sidewalk. It was just not a safe sidewalk, and Luz was riding her scooter up and down the sidewalk, having fun with her mother following closely behind. Now, as she's riding her scooter, her shoe actually falls off, so Luz gets off the scooter and she goes over to pick up her shoe. Luz tried to put the shoe on herself, but she was 4 years old at this time, so she was struggling to do so, and that's when her mother Reina decided to bend down and help her daughter. So Reina bent down to tie her daughter's shoe, and as you can see, they're still on the sidewalk. They're not in the parking lot, they're not in the middle of the road, like they're literally on the sidewalk, which is meant for pedestrians. But again, this parking lot and this sidewalk were built incorrectly, so in order for someone to back out or get inside the laundromat, they literally have to drive over the sidewalk. So as you can see, Luz and her mother are crouched down on the ground trying to put on her shoe when all of a sudden 38-year-old Jeanette Maria, who was driving this black SUV, starts to back out of the parking lot. Again, Luz and her mother are low on the ground. It's not like Reina is standing up and is super obvious, but at the same time, when you're backing out, you should always be aware of your surroundings. So Jeanette backs out of the parking lot, and as you can see, Luz and her mother were right in front of her. As she gets ready to peel out of the parking lot, she runs over 4-year-old Luz and her mother Reina. After she ran them over, Jeanette stopped because she obviously realized that she had hit something. So she stopped the car, she took a little bit of a pause, and then she just continued driving. She just drove off, and she left Luz and Reina alone on the sidewalk. She didn't call the police, she didn't get out of her car to check, what she had hit, nothing. Which is just crazy because her car literally shook after running over 2 people. She obviously was aware that she had hit something, but she didn't care enough to get out and look at what had happened. Now people saw all of this go down, so they immediately ran over to Luz and her mother and tried to call for help. There's actually video footage of Reina just sitting on the ground hugging her daughter, and she just looks like she's in shock. Reina had a really bad injury to her leg, but the injuries to her daughter Luz were much more severe. Police were informed about what had happened, and they actually pulled over the driver, Jeanette Maria, about 4 blocks away from the laundromat. Police informed her that she had just ran over a 4-year-old girl and her mother, and Jeanette was in complete shock. She said she had no idea how this had happened and that she had no idea she had hit someone. She denies everything, and then the police just let her go. Okay, I'm running out of time. More in part 2. This is the case of 4 teenage girls that were brutally murdered inside a frozen yogurt shop in Austin, Texas. On Friday, December 6, 1991, 17-year-olds Eliza Thomas and Jennifer Harbison were working the night shift at an I Can't Believe It's yogurt shop. The yogurt shop was very busy that night. There were a lot of customers, and at one point, Eliza's own mother even stopped by just to check in on her daughter, and everything seemed to be going well that night. At around 9:30 p.m. that night, Jennifer's younger sister Sarah stopped by the yogurt shop with her best friend Amy. The two girls were planning on having a sleepover later that night, so they went to the yogurt shop to wait for Jennifer to get off work so she could bring them back to Sarah's house. That night, the store was set to close at 11 p.m., and the rule was that 15 minutes before closing time, the girls needed to lock the front door. That way, any new customers wouldn't be able to get inside while the girls cleaned up and counted the money. So at 10:25 p.m. that night, Eliza and Jennifer began cleaning up the shop with the help of Sarah and her best friend Amy. At around 10:42 p.m., the final few customers were getting ready to leave the store when they noticed that the only people left inside were Amy, Eliza, Jennifer, and Sarah, plus 2 men. These 2 men were just sitting at a booth. They weren't even eating frozen yogurt. They were just having a can of soda, and they were whispering to each other and just acting kind of odd. One of the customers leaving was a woman, and she saw this and she thought it was a little bit strange, so before she left, she asked Eliza and Jennifer if they were okay. The girls said no, that they felt fine and that they were just cleaning up and then getting ready to leave soon. Eliza and Jennifer said goodbye to the woman. They locked the front door with the 2 men still inside the store and then went back to cleaning. 15 minutes later, it was 11 p.m., closing time, which meant that the store should have been completely clear of any customers and the only people left inside should have been Eliza, Sarah, Jennifer, and Amy. However, 3 minutes after closing time at 11:03 p.m., there was a no sale rung up in the cash register. Next to the frozen yogurt shop was a party supply store, and at 11:47 p.m. that night, the owner of the party store realized that there was smoke coming from the yogurt shop and he could see flames inside. Firefighters immediately arrived to the scene, and as they were going through the building, they came across the nude bodies of 4 teenage girls: Eliza Thomas, Amy Ayers, and sisters Jennifer and Sarah Harbison. All 4 girls were found stripped, bound with their own clothing, and shot in the head. Police originally believed that this might have been a robbery gone wrong, but then they realized that there was still money inside the cash register. So if this was just a robbery, why did they leave the money behind? There were also no signs of a break-in. The front door was still locked, but the back door was unlocked and had been propped open with either a rock or a pack of cigarettes. Since the building had been lit on fire, any potential evidence was pretty much destroyed. Really wasn't much to go off of, but 8 days after the murders, police had made an arrest. Okay, more details are in part 2.
His mother murdered her 3 kids during a psychosis episode. On January 24th, 2023, 32-year-old Lindsay Clancy took the life of her 5-year-old daughter Cora, 3-year-old son Dawson, and 7-month-old baby Callan. On this day, at 4:53 p.m., Lindsay asked her husband Patrick to pick up some dinner at a restaurant not too far from the house. About an hour later, Patrick returned home and noticed that there was absolute silence. He called for Lindsay's name, and after no response, he went into the bedroom and noticed that the window was open. Lindsay had jumped out the window in an attempt to take her own life, but she was still alive. This is where things get really sad. Patrick went to the basement and found all 3 kids with exercise cords around their necks. Both Cora and Dawson passed away in the hospital, but baby Callan passed away 3 days later due to his injuries. Lindsay's defense attorney claims that she was suffering from postpartum psychosis, which led her to break from reality and murder her children. But the state attorney argues that these killings were premeditated and that Lindsay sent her husband to get food on purpose so that she can commit these crimes. However, Dr. Caney, who is a board member of Postpartum Support International, clarified that women can completely break with reality during violent episodes. She also said that women who are a few weeks postpartum should be aware of the symptoms of psychosis, which is usually hallucinating. Lindsay was charged with 2 counts of murder, 3 counts of strangulation and assault, and battery with a deadly weapon. And get this, she's currently paralyzed from the waist down after jumping out the window.
This is what happened to 14-year-old Norma Lisbeth and how she was killed after getting into a fight with her school bully. Norma Lisbeth Ramos was a 14-year-old girl that lived in Teotihuacan, Mexico. She was the youngest of 3. She had an older sister named Alma and an older brother named Omar. Now, we don't really know much about Norma, but her friends and family say that she used to be filled with so much happiness and life. She wanted to grow up, she wanted to become a nurse and help others. However, as Norma started to grow up, that light and happiness once inside of her started to quickly fade. This is because Norma was being bullied at school. Some of her friends have come forward and said that the bullying started all the way in elementary school. People would make fun of her skin color, they would call her morenita, they would make fun of the fact that she had curly hair. The kids were brutal to her, and most of the aggression came from another student named Asara Eileen. It seemed like Asara was obsessed with bullying and tormenting Norma. She would make fun of Norma's skin color, she would make fun of the fact that Norma's family didn't have a lot of money. She would even tell the other students, if you try to be nice to Norma, if you try to talk to her, if you try to be her friend, we're also going to bully you. Asara would hype up the other students, and the minute that Norma would step foot onto campus, the bullying would immediately begin. She would walk into a classroom and people would actually throw things at her. One of the few friends that Norma had came forward and told reporters that a couple of the classmates had actually threatened to physically assault Norma. One day, Norma went to the school bathroom and a couple of her classmates walked in and they tried to beat her up. Norma tried to put an end to it, and the classmates told her, if you snitch on us, then we will assault you. It seemed like the whole school was against her, so Norma actually did speak up and she told her professors about what was going on. She told them about the taunting, about the bullying, about the threats, but nothing was done about it. In fact, one of her teachers told her, girls will be girls. She basically tried to make it seem that this is what teenage girls do, that they bully each other, that they make fun of each other, and that that's just how things are. However, it wasn't just girls that were bullying Norma, it was the boys in the class as well. Literally everybody would taunt her, and on February 20th, 2023, Norma's main bully, Asara, confronted her and told her that the next day, on February 21st, she wanted to meet her outside of the school to get into a physical fight. And she told Norma that she better show up. Of course, Norma was scared, so she tried to tell the director of the school about the fight, but the director did not listen to her. The director told her, can you give me a moment? I'm really busy. And she turned around and ignored Norma. Norma just didn't know what to do. She had already told the professors about the bullying. She had told the director of the school, but no one cared. So she felt like the only option she had was to show up to the fight the next day and defend herself. The next day, on February 21st, 2023, the fight happened. There is footage of this fight and it's very intense. Asara is the one wearing the skirt and she just went absolutely crazy on Norma. At one point, she grabbed a stone and she started hitting Norma on the head with the stone. What's crazy is that there was a group of students just standing there watching this and cheering on the fight. At one point, Norma starts bleeding and the classmates actually laugh at her. Okay, more in part 2.
Did you know that The Purge was based on a true story? The Purge is a 2013 film where once a year all crime is allowed for a 12-hour time period. As terrifying as it sounds, the horror movie was inspired by a real-life event that took place in 217 BC. This week-long event was called Saturnalia and was celebrated by ancient Romans from December 17th to December 25th. People were encouraged to drink, do whatever they wanted, including sacrificing each other to the gods. Throughout the week, businesses and work would close, with slaves given the freedom to say and do what they'd like without being arrested. Even though this was exciting for many ancient Romans, it often got super dark when people took things too far. The story even reveals that during this event, fake kings would be crowned and given the power to order people to do anything they wanted. But at the end of the celebration, these kings would be sacrificed as a show of respect for the Roman god. Many believe that the purge may take place again in the future. What do you guys think?
Let's talk about what happened to 4-year-old Paulette Ibarra and how she went missing but was later found between her bed. Paulette Ibarra was born on July 20th, 2005 in Mexico City. She was born to her parents Mauricio and Lisette Fara, and she had an older sister named Lisette, named after their mom. Now, Paulette was born prematurely. She was born 25 weeks into her mom's pregnancy, when usually a pregnancy lasts about 40 weeks. When she was born, she only weighed 1 pound and 7 ounces. Now, Paulette's parents were told that she would most likely never be able to walk or talk or just function normally. And as she grew up, she did have some developmental delays and some physical disabilities, but she was doing a lot better than the doctors expected her to. The family lived in a large sky-rise apartment in Mexico City, and they actually had 2 live-in nannies who were sisters, Erica and Martha, who lived with the family, and they would help take care of the 2 girls, but mainly Paulette. On March 22nd, 2009, nannies Erica and Martha woke up and started getting the girls ready for school. Now, Paulette's older sister, Lisette, was 7 years old, so she actually started school earlier than Paulette. So in the morning, the nannies would get Lisette ready for school, they would walk her to the bus stop, and then they would come back to the apartment and wake up Paulette. That morning, they did their normal routine, and when they went into Paulette's bedroom to wake her up, she wasn't there. Erica started looking all over the bedroom to see if maybe Paulette was hiding somewhere, but she wasn't. She goes to the kitchen kitchen area to look for Paulette, and that's when she hears a noise coming from the living room. She goes to see what the noise is, thinking that it's Paulette, but no, it's actually Mauricio, Paulette's father. Erica asks him, "Where's Paulette?" And he says, "I have no idea, I haven't seen her." Erica explains the situation to Mauricio, and he says, "Go check the main bedroom, maybe she's in bed with Lisette." So Erica goes over to Mauricio and Lisette's bedroom, but Paulette is not there. Erica wakes up Lisette and tells her, "Your daughter is missing," and that's when Lisette wakes up and says, maybe she went to go play on the playground downstairs, like she has to be somewhere. Erica and her sister Martha started looking all over the apartment building. They looked in the elevators, they looked in the lobby, they looked everywhere. And while the nannies were doing this, Lisette was in her kitchen just smoking a cigarette and having a cup of coffee. She wasn't even looking for her daughter or freaking out. Meanwhile, Mauricio was kind of just opening random closets to see if Paulette was there, but he wasn't really looking that thoroughly. Now, the nannies thought this was weird. I mean, if your daughter is missing, you wouldn't just sit there and smoke a cigarette and have a cup of coffee. Paulette was nowhere to be found, so police get called to the scene and they start investigating the entire apartment. They're looking for signs of a forced entry, any broken glass. They're just trying to figure out what happened. They also checked to see if anything was stolen or if anything was missing, maybe it was a robbery gone wrong, but no, everything was there besides Paulette. They also checked the apartment building surveillance footage, but there was no footage of Paulette ever leaving. So that meant that she was somewhere inside this building. Weeks would go by without any answers, and on March 31st, 2009, forensic experts were inside Paulette's bedroom looking for clues when they pulled back the blanket and found Paulette. She was found between her mattress and the end of the bed. Okay, more in part 2. What happened to 8-year-old Cherish Periwinkle and how she was taken from a Walmart by this man. Cherish was born on December 24th, 2004 in Jacksonville, Florida to her mother Rain Periwinkle and her father Billy Giroux. Everyone says that Cherish was a happy child and that she always had a smile on her face. She wanted to be just like her mother Rain when she grew up, and she would even wear Rain's clothes, her heels, play with her makeup, everything. She recently learned how to ride a bike without her training wheels, and she was just like every other kid. She wanted to be happy, she wanted to live life and just be with her family. Now, as for her parents were not together. Billy lived in California with a new wife, and Rain lived in Florida with Cherish. At the time, Rain had a boyfriend, and she actually gave birth to 2 little girls. So now Cherish had 2 new half-sisters. On June 21st, 2013, 8-year-old Cherish Periwinkle was getting ready to fly to California to go visit her dad Billy for the summer. She was packing her bags, washing her hair, and that's when she decided that she wanted to go get some new clothes for the trip. Rain agreed to go shopping, and her boyfriend gave her $100, and this $100 was supposed to be used to buy the girls new clothes, to buy food, to buy household items, and then there was supposed to be money left over to take Cherish to the airport tomorrow and pay for a taxi. So they were on a budget, and they decided to go to the dollar store to do the shopping. Now, at the time, Rain didn't have a car, but the dollar store was only 20 minutes away walking, so she decided to walk there with Cherish and the 2 other girls. Now, at the dollar store, she wanted to buy one of her daughters this black dress, but she didn't know if she would have enough money to buy it. So she was in the checkout line trying to figure out how to buy this dress, and that's when she was approached by a 59-year-old man named Donald Smith. Donald came up to her and said, "If you want the dress, I'll buy it for you." At first, Rain was kind of creeped out by this man because she had seen him in the store earlier. When she was in the shoe section trying on shoes, she noticed that this man was just standing there watching her. So she figured that maybe this man was going to rob her, and she was a little bit nervous when he approached her. But then he calmed her down and said that he also had little ones of his own and that she had her hands full and that he just wanted to help her. He also told her that his wife was on the way to give him a $150 gift card to Walmart and that if she wanted it, she could use it. After learning that he had a wife and that he also had little ones, she began to trust him. She felt like he wasn't going to rob her and that this was just an old, sweet man that wanted to help her out. So she agreed to take the gift card. They all walked outside to the Dollar Tree parking lot and just waited for Donald's wife to come by. While they were waiting, it started to rain. Now again, Rain doesn't have her own car, so she was kind of thinking, how am I going to get back home in the rain with 3 young children? And on top of that, the wife was taking forever to get there, and Rain kept asking Donald, "Where's your wife?" Donald would just tell her, "Don't worry, she's on her way, she's going to be here soon." However, once it started to rain, Donald told Rain, "Why don't I drive you to Walmart and my wife can meet us there?" And he was driving this white van that looked really suspicious, and Rain just didn't know what to do. And Donald could tell that she was worried about this, so he said, "Listen, you can trust me. Here's my driver's license. Look at my information. Like, you're gonna be fine." And because of that, Rain decided to trust him, and she got in the van with her 3 young children. As for the van, there were blinds on the windows, there was no middle seat, and the front passenger seat was pushed all the way down. Okay, more in part 2. 2 on what happened to 14-year-old Alicia Navarro and how she left this note saying she would return but hasn't come back yet. Jessica finds this note in Alicia's bedroom and she says that it seems like her daughter wrote this in a hurry. Normally, Alicia had very pretty handwriting, but this handwriting looked a little bit messy. So after finding the note and finding the 2 chairs leaned against the brick wall, Jessica assumed that her daughter had snuck out of the house and had used the chairs to climb over the wall. Normally, this gate was unlocked, but she figures that maybe Alicia thought that the gate would make too much noise, and that's why she decided to just climb over the wall. As soon as she realized that her daughter Alicia was missing, she called the Glendale Police Department and reported her daughter as missing. Police immediately arrived to the scene and they started going through Alicia's bedroom to see if they could find any type of evidence. They discovered that Alicia had taken her laptop, her comic books, her cell phone, and body sprays. Along with that, she had also taken a small backpack adorned with metallic cat ears. What they thought was odd is that Alicia didn't take any of her cell phone or laptop chargers. So it honestly seemed like she did plan on returning home since she didn't take any of her chargers with her or any of her clothes. They tried to track her cell phone to see if they could figure out where it would last ping, but her cell phone had been turned off since the morning she disappeared. She also didn't take any of her medication with her, and Jessica says that she needs this medication. So all of these things combined together again made police and the family believe that Alicia truly wanted to return. They started looking at the evidence found outside of the house and they saw that there were some footprints leading from the backyard to the front yard. Well, they checked those footprints and they confirmed that those were Alicia Navarro's footprints. They also checked the neighbor surveillance cameras, but they did not capture Alicia leaving. The FBI joined the case about 2 weeks later and they went through all of Alicia's internet history, her gaming history, everything to see if that could help with the investigation. They discovered that 11 days before her disappearance, she had messaged a 20-year-old man named Clark through Discord. In these messages, Alicia told Clark that she had sold her Xbox, which she really loved because she loved to game, and that she had a boyfriend. But she didn't give any specific details about who this boyfriend was. Police looked into Clark, they looked through all of his history, and they ended up clearing him. He says that him and Alicia were part of the same online gaming group, and he also found it odd that Alicia would run away from home. Because again, she was very shy and timid. Jessica and the rest of the family started to believe that Alicia had been lured by an online predator. The reason for that is because, again, Alicia spent the majority of her time online. There was one incident that Jessica had caught Alicia giving personal information to a man online. As soon as she saw that happen, she sat Alicia down and told her about the dangers of speaking to strangers and that she shouldn't share these details with anyone. And there was another incident where Jessica actually filed a police report with the Arizona Police Department because Alicia was speaking to a man online that was much older than her. This man was asking Alicia questions such as, "Do you have any stuffed animals?" He also said, "Well, if you don't have any stuffed animals, I can be your stuffed animal." It was just a very inappropriate conversation, so she reported it to the police, but they didn't really do much about it. And one day Jessica noticed that there was a hole about the size of a golf ball in Alicia's window. Okay, more in part 3.